Hey everyone, this is the Growth Paramedic here. I want to go through today the pump set and how it works fundamentally, because there seems to be not a lot of educational content out there that actually properly describes how it functions and how it works. So today I'm going to cover that, and then in another video connected to this one, I will do a video demonstration on how I do it. I actually really like pump sets because I understand how it works fundamentally, and I'm able to do it with one hand because I know how it works. Once you understand how it works, it's a lot easier to manage in that pre-hospital setting, and especially in those moments where it's very tense and it's very adrenaline rushed, because let's just say you have a patient who is bleeding out, or you have a very hypotensive patient that needs that fluid in ASAP. So, your septic patient, your anaphylactic patient. But first, let's just look at the actual setup of your standard pump set. Now, the one you see here is probably the most common type you will see in the pre-hospital setting. Where I work, we use this type of pump set. I'm not too sure what every state out there uses, but this is the standard one we have. And I'm going to label it just to make it easier. But at the top, you have your perforator. So I'm just going to quickly write down as quickly as I can. So your perforator, this is what goes into the fluid bag, whatever you're trying to give to the patient, whether that's glucose, 10%, or it's compound sodium lactate. Now this is your first chamber, and in this chamber you have I would actually call this your first chamber. And then this is what I would say your micron filter. So this is a 200 micron filter. That's not really important. It's the one at the bottom that's more important. And this is the one that you use to determine both the drip rate and also whether or not the pump is actually on. And I'll go through that later on in this video, but let's continue. So this is your first chamber, and this is your second chamber. This is your pump chamber. So your manual hand pump. So if you need to get fluid in really quickly, you can squeeze this second chamber, and that's going to push fluid into that patient a lot quicker than if you were just letting it drip by its own. Then you have the what I call the roller regulator. So this is your on and off switch, really. If you roll it up, it gets tight and it becomes like a tourniquet, and it stops the fluid going through. And if you loosen it, fluid can then go through unchallenged. So that's your regulator, your on and off switch. And then you have your what they call the recess allure activated valve. So you can put medications in here, or you can put your medications here. So it's a lure lock, it's a lure valve. And that's for your medications. And then down here you have your lure lock with a rotating collar. So this is your lure. Now if I can spell, I can't. Sorry, that was from another video I was doing. So that is your lure lock. And up here you have your rotating collar. So that's what you use to lock it in place. Now, once we understand the general gist of it, let's now go through how it actually works once you start using it in the pre-hospital setting. Now, let's begin with the perforator. So above all, you want to make sure you have the right fluid and the right medication you're using for the patient. So this will be better explained in the video demonstration, but essentially, before you even open this up, before you even open the pump set, you always want to check the medication you're giving. And for me personally, I don't yell out, or I don't speak out loud what the medication is. So I will read it in my mind, the name of the medication, the date of expiration, and also the dosage on that medication. For example, compound sodium lactate, 500 mils, and expires in December 2023. That will be in my head, but I know what it is, and then I will pass that to my partner, and I'll ask my partner to read that out loud for me. And that ensures that the partner, although they are on top of their game, they may just quickly, if you had read it out loud, repeat exactly what you have said. So it ensures that there is no risk of error when you give them that bag to check, because then they will have to read it out loud themselves, and by that you ensure that what they say is what you have read. Once you've done that, you're good to go, and then you can start opening the fluid bag. Okay, the first thing, before you even penetrate with the perforator into the bag, you want to do the most essential thing, and that is to use the roller regulator. You want to push this all the way up. So let's use a red pen, because the way the pump set works is via gravity. The weight from the fluid bag and the fluid up there will go into the pump set and then will be pushed through the pump into the lure lock and into the patient. So we want to make sure before we perforate that there is no risk of fluid just starting to free flow into the pump. Otherwise, that is where the kind of bubbles and all that kind of issues with trying to get the bubbles out begins. So first off, before you do anything else, before you perforate, you want to put this thing all the way up here, nice and tight. I personally also like to put the roller regulator closer to where the lure lock is. So I'll bring this all the way up here to where the recessed lure valve is. So I'll bring this up, even before I lock it, bring this up here, close it, and then I like to use this from here to here. I like to roll it up into a nice little ball, kind of loop it around itself so this part is doesn't get dangled and tangled everywhere. It's nice and neat around your hand, and it's better explained in the video tutorial. But once you got that set up, now you can think about perforating. So first step, lock the roller regulator. Make sure there is no risk of fluid starting to free flow and that there is no suction essentially in the pump set. Then you want to perforate. Once you perforate, there may be a little bit of fluid coming through, but it won't be a lot. So let's just say you perforated the bag and you have your fluid here. That's going to start to slowly drip into the micron filter. Now that's okay. This part is where you need to be more concerned about. You do not want this fully filled up. You want this halfway done. And the way you do it is by gently squeezing this part of the chamber. And what you want to do is when you squeeze, it's going to fill up from the bottom. And it's going to go all the way up. And you want to be quite gentle with it. You don't want to push too hard that you accidentally go over and fill up the whole chamber. You want to just go nice little squeezes until you reach halfway, 50%. And again, the reason why you want to do that is because this is your drip rate chamber. This will help determine what the drip rate is that you're currently putting into the patient, and also whether or not the drip rate is actually working. So always, when you want to make sure that there's actually fluid going into the patient, you always want to check the first chamber, because the first chamber is going to tell you whether or not the fluid is flowing. Now, you can tell the fluid is flowing is by it dripping. If it's dripping, the pump set is on. If it's not dripping and there's no fluid coming up, and let's just say it just kind of builds here but it doesn't drop, there is what you call a backlog of pressure. So the fluid isn't dripping, and if you want it to drip and it's not, you have a problem. And the way you need to start thinking is, what is causing that problem? And there are 3 key problems you need to think of if the drip rate is not going when you want it to go. The first thing you want to do is check that the actual line around the whole of the thing is not kinked. You want to make sure that any part that's dangled around isn't pushed up against the patient and the stretcher, or it isn't tied around each other so tightly that it causes a tourniquet kind of effect. Once you've identified that the line is not kinked and not squeezed up, you then want to make sure that the actual lure lock is connected into the patient. This is assuming that you've already primed the line. This is when you're checking to make sure the drip rate's still going. But when you're when you've checked that there's no kinks, you want to make sure the lure lock, you've actually properly secured it into the bung that's connected to the cannula in the patient. Because if it's not properly in, the fluid will not flow into the patient. Once you've confirmed that the fluid is connected to the bung properly, you then want to thirdly check that the entry site is not in itself compromised. So you want to check that the fluid isn't going into the tissue, the interstitial space, and there's not like a big ball of a skin or whatever building up around the entry site, because it means that you might have not gone into the vein properly, and that's an issue. So you want to check around the area, make sure there's no fluid leaking out, and you also want to make sure that the positioning of the cannula is not compromised. Because let's just say you've got an IV access on the wrist, if they flex it, the cannula site might actually get compressed. So you might need to readjust the positioning of the hand or the limb to the point where there's no pressure being pushed onto the cannula. So always, if you can, keep the patient nice and straight with their arm if there's a cannula in there, to reduce that chance of a kink at the cannula site. Those are your three main considerations if there is indeed a situation where the fluid isn't flowing and you want it to flow. Now, let's go back to here. So now that you filled this up to 50%, and this is still locked, now you want to look at actually making sure that the positioning of the positioning of these two chambers is set up the right way. And I can't stress this enough. This is where things go wrong. This is where the bubbles start flowing in and you're stuck with having to waste 100, 200 mils of fluid because you're trying to get those bubbles out. As you may have noticed or may know, you do not want any bubbles going into the patient's cannula, into the patient's vein, because that can cause an air emboli, and you do not want to have that problem at the beginning when you're trying to get fluids in. So always do it right the first time and you won't have any issues. And the way you do that is by ensuring that it's set up exactly like this. Your first chamber, should be in line with your second chamber. And how I describe it is like a smile. Imagine your two chambers are eyes, and this is and the kind of the link between the first chamber and your second chamber is your smile. So you want to set up so the eyes are there and it's smiling. Okay, you do not want, example, the first chamber there and then droops down to the second chamber, because that leads to a big problem, and that is when you unlock the roller regulator, the fluid that's here, when it goes down, if it's not shaped where the eyes are together and there's a smile, what happens is it will actually, the fluid will go to here. It will actually start filling at the end, at the top of the second chamber, and then that's where the bubbles come in. You want to have it that when you unlock or you loosen the roller regulator, the fluid from the first chamber goes through and it fills up the second chamber from the bottom and it goes up the chamber. And you want that to fill all the way up to the top. Now, the reason for this is because what happens is, if you have it set up like this, the air in the pump set will be pushed out, because this will be full of fluid, right? And there'll be, let me just clear this up. Okay. This would be full of fluid because you filled this up 50%, and there may be a little bit of fluid here. But the rest of this is full of air. And you want to get rid of it. Once you have it like a smile face and this are together, the roller door, once loosened, will have a suction effect, and the water, or the fluid, sorry, in the first chamber will push the air out from the bottom to the top. So what happens is it will come up like so, and what it will do is it will fill up like this, and in the whole process of it filling up, all that air that's in the pump set will be pushed out evenly. There will be almost no risk of bubbles forming when you have it this way. So you want it to fill up like this, and what happens is now it's going to go into the line and it's going to keep going, and you can actually see it going up, perfect, like this, and bam, now you got your fluid fully primed, your IV is ready to go, and there are no bubbles. That is how you want to set it up. And the key point here is that you want your first chamber and your second chamber looking like a smile face. Remember, these are your eyes. The line is your smile. If there's no face, the line is not ready to go. So that's how I remember it. And you can do this once you understand the fundamentals of it with one hand. Anyway guys, I hope you guys found that useful. I'll do a video demonstration on how to do it exactly the way I mentioned. And trust me, I have 100% success rate with this, and it works every time.